Chapter 8. Flavor for the Soup. On the stroke of 4, Rudy reached into the upper bunk and shook Mike. "Departure time," he whispered. With a low moan, Mike jumped down and began struggling into his clothes. He mumbled, "I'm sure my outlook on Alcatraz would be much less severe, if only I could get some sleep." "Pretty soon you won't need an outlook on Alcatraz at all," Rudy whispered back. It'll all be for nothing but an unpleasant memory. Ready?" Mike nodded. "Let's go." They tiptoed toward the door and were just reaching for the doorknob when each was suddenly seized by his belt and hauled backwards into the counselor's room. Chip, his face flaming with anger, shut his door and turned on them. "Miller!" Although the counselor was whispering, it sounded like shouting. "Where do you think you're going?" "The dock, the mainland, and then home," Rudy replied calmly. "What kind of guy are you, Miller?" Chip fumed. "I heard you promise Mr. Warren that you wouldn't take a boat without permission." "That's right, and I won't. But last night I asked Mike if I could take a boat, and he said yes. So I have permission, and I gave him my permission to come along with me." "What?" Chip was no longer whispering. "Don't you bandy words with me. You know darn well Mr. Warren meant official permission." "Oh," said Rudy poker-faced. "It's a good thing you stopped us then. Old Elias would have been annoyed." Mike laughed, and amazingly so did Chip. But the counselor's amusement soon passed. "Get back into bed, Miller, and you too, Webster, and another 2 days' work detail for each of you. Now move." He opened his door and pushed them out into the campers section of the cabin. "What's going on?" came a sleepy voice from an upper bunk. "What are you doing up?" bellowed Chip. "Go to sleep, all of you." Last sound Rudy heard before he drifted off was Mike laughing into his pillow. "Hey," said Chip, looking around table 13 at breakfast. "Where are Miller and Webster?" "Who cares?" sneered Harold Green. "The last I saw," said Adam, "they were down at the dock watching them load empty cartons on the supply boat." With a scream of protest, Chip jumped up, overturning the bench and sending 5 boys sprawling. "The supply boat? Oh no!" He tore out of the dining hall like a madman and thundered across the compound, shouting "Stop" all the way. As his feet pounded onto the wooden dock, a horrible sight met his eyes. There stood Frank, clipboard in hand, waving goodbye to the supply boat as it pulled away. "No! Stop it! Come back!" "What's the matter, Chip?" asked Frank, bewildered. "What's wrong?" Frank watched in horror as Chip hurled himself off the dock and began swimming madly after the boat. "Stop! Come back! Stop!" shouted Frank. He wasn't sure why. Dave came running up from the nearby swimming dock. "What's the matter? What's Chip doing?" "I don't know," Frank shrugged. "He's trying to catch a supply boat for some reason." Dave laughed. "Look at him, floundering around out there. If he wanted to catch that boat, he should have sent Miller." "Miller, that's it," Frank exclaimed. "Miller must be on that boat." He ran to the end of the dock and jumped into a small motorboat. The little craft roared out after the supply boat, and with its superior speed cut in front of it. Frank waved the driver back to the dock, then pulled up beside Chip and hauled him aboard. They roared back to the dock. Chip jumped from one boat to the other. "Miller," he howled, his eyes searching the stacked cartons. "You come out right now." Arms flailing, he knocked over a large corrugated carton in the stern. There sat Rudy and Mike, blinking in the sudden sunlight. Chip loomed over them, furious and dripping wet. "Oh, hi," said Rudy. "Has it been raining?" "Miller, what are you two doing here?" "I don't suppose you'd believe me if I said we were being kidnapped," suggested Rudy. "All right, Miller," said Chip through clenched teeth. "You're going to pay for this." "Work detail?" asked Rudy. "Work detail," bellowed Chip. 5 more days. And kitchen duty, today and tomorrow. Now get off this boat. Move." As Chip was quick marching Rudy and Mike off the boat toward the dining hall, Frank was running along beside him. "Don't you think you're being a little hard on them?" he asked in an undertone. I mean, if you've been punishing them a lot, maybe that's why they want to run away. Ha! Exclaimed Chip. If this keeps up, the next person running away from here will be me. I don't suppose he'd be willing to give us that in writing, Rudy commented to Mike. Can it, Miller? Snapped Chip. Now both of you, get in there and grab some breakfast, and when you're finished, report to the kitchen. The staff will put you to work. He turned to Frank. Maybe a little potato peeling will show him who's boss around here. Why, said Rudy, scraping the abundant leftovers from a stack of plates. Don't they just take our food and throw it straight into the garbage? That would eliminate the middleman. That's enough out of you, growled the chief cook. Keep working. The sooner you finish the work, the sooner you get out to join your cabin and have some fun. Rudy looked at Mike. We're in no hurry, he said. Well, we are, said another cook. We're not going to stay here overtime on your account. We work hard, you know. It's not easy cooking for a bunch of kids who don't like anything. Maybe they'd like something, if everything didn't look and taste like putty, commented Rudy mildly. Well, if you don't like it, howled the chief cook, why don't you just take a boat and leave? Instantly, Rudy began to scrape and stack dishes with model efficiency. Taking his cue from Rudy, although he wasn't quite sure why, Mike, too, began to work quickly. In 5 minutes, they were finished. Rudy grabbed Mike by the arm and began dragging him across the compound toward the dock. Hey, protested Mike, where are we going? You heard the man, said Rudy. He distinctly said we should take a boat and leave. But we can't, cried Mike. We promised not to take any more boats. Without official permission, Rudy added. But now we have official permission from the chief cook himself. But, well, is it or is it not official permission? Rudy asked defiantly. I don't know, Mike began. Well, Rudy interrupted. Suit yourself. I'm going. He continued to run toward the dock. But they'll see us. They'll catch us, Mike protested, keeping pace. Maybe, said Rudy, and maybe not. There must be a dozen guys out there in boats. Maybe they won't notice us. The two jumped into a motorboat. Rudy was just casting off when they heard the sound of running feet, and a familiar voice howled, Miller, you come back here. Chip caught the mooring line just as the boat roared into action, and the boat tore away from the dock. With a terrified howl, the counselor, still clutching the rope, flew in a 3-meter arc through the air before belly flopping with a huge splash into the water. Rudy gunned the boat to full speed. Rudy, stop, screamed Mike. He's still back there. We're towing him. Rudy glanced quickly behind them. There was Chip, kicking up a spray like a cabin cruiser. Instantly he cut the motor. That, he said in disgust, is the only clone in the world who can water ski on his face. What are we going to do? Said Mike. He's going to kill us. Chip swam up to the edge of the boat and climbed on board. Take it back to the dock, he gasped. Now. Obediently, Rudy turned the boat around, steered it up to the dock, and threw the rope to Frank, who had witnessed the incident and was grimly waiting. What's all this? Shouted the head counselor. When Chip fell in the lake, explained Rudy, we stopped our boat and came back to pick him up. It was, in essence, the truth, with a few important details left out. Chip threw back his head and emitted a horrible roar. You saw what happened, he screamed to Frank. So did I, said Rudy. Your takeoff was great, but your landing was a little rough. Shut up, Miller, cried Chip. You're in big trouble now. You promised Mr. Warren, and you promised me not to take a boat without permission. I had permission, said Rudy earnestly. Official permission. Yeah, snarled Chip. Who from? The chief cook. He said if we didn't like it here, we should take a boat and leave. And we don't like it here, so we took a boat and left. At least, we tried to. He eyed Chip accusingly. That's it, Miller. That's it. You know darn well that wasn't permission to take off. Nobody gets permission to take off. You are stuck here, Miller. Here, and me, with you. You can either try to make the best of it and maybe have some fun, or you can be an idiot. He paused, gasping for breath. We're not going to force you to play anything. You can sit around and rot for all we care. But you're staying put. Understood? Yes, said Rudy, his face expressionless. And that goes double for you, Webster. You should know better than to follow Miller around. He's just getting you into trouble. Now, both of you, 5 more days' work detail and 2 more kitchen duty. Right now you go back to your bunk. You're confined there until lunch. Rudy and Mike scampered away in the direction of cabin 13. Wow, exclaimed Mike as they threw open the door and rushed inside. Was he ever mad? Rudy draped himself across his bunk. This is Camp Algonquian Island, he recited. It was founded 31 years ago by Elias Warden, Bowlegs the First. It is presently under the regime of Bowlegs the Third. Never before, until today, has a clone flown that far or that high without permission. Mike laughed. Don't you mean official permission? Official permission, Rudy amended. How about a little chess? Chess? Doesn't anything bother you? Asked Mike, still shaking from the events of the morning. No, said Rudy flatly. They were just setting up the board when Chip, glowing like an avenging angel, appeared in the doorway. All right, you two, get over to the kitchen. You're to help prepare and serve lunch. Move. He disappeared. Rudy put the chessboard aside and went over to Harold Green's suitcase. He reached inside and brought out a single white sock. What's that for? Asked Mike suspiciously. We're to help prepare lunch, explained Rudy. I thought this would add a little flavor to the soup. Hold out your plate, said Rudy patiently from behind the lunch counter. Not Rubber Man, you know. He slopped a generous portion of beef stew onto the first plate. Next. Farther up the counter, Mike, his white apron spattered with green, was serving pea soup. His eyes darted nervously into each bowlful that he ladled out. Along came cabin 13 in the line. The boys self-consciously ignored Rudy and Mike, all except Harold Green, who snickered and sneered at both of them. Well, Miller, said Chip, smiling broadly, how do you like serving the food? A lot better than I like eating it. Hey, you, snapped one of the cooks from the kitchen. I don't want to hear any more cracks about the food. We'll have to whisper from now on, said Rudy confidentially to Mike. This time, Mike did not laugh. He had turned deathly white. As the last few boys filed by, he leaned over to Rudy. Rudy, we've got to get out of here. Why? Asked Rudy, about to fill 2 plates of stew for himself and Mike. The sock, gasped Mike in a high-pitched wheeze. Chip got it. It went into Chip's bowl. Faint indications of a smile played about the corners of Rudy's mouth. Fate, he said quietly. Let's get out of here, Mike repeated. We can't, said Rudy. We have orders to sit down and eat lunch with our bunk under our clone's watchful eye. But Rudy... And I don't want any soup, thank you. Mike had to laugh. Neither do I. They sat down at table 13 and began to eat. Chip, who was a hearty eater, dipped his spoon vigorously into the soup. His eyes bulged as he came with a long, green, dripping sweat sock. Hey, what's this? Still holding the spoon half a centimeter from his mouth, Chip surveyed table 13. All right, who did it? Rudy looked up innocently. Did what? Who put this sock in my soup? There was dead silence. Well, suggested Rudy helpfully, why don't you look at the label and see who it belongs to? Gingerly Chip wrung the soup out of the sock and turned the cuff inside out. Harold Green, he read. Green, you did this? I didn't, squeaked Harold. Honest. Chip looked down the table to where Mike was sitting, red as a beet, and Rudy was passively eating his stew. Miller, you did it. It was Miller, piped Harold. Rudy put down his fork and heaved a sigh. Caught again. Frank came over to table 13. Chip, what's this about a dirty sock in the soup? Clean sock, Rudy amended. The food around here is bad enough without having to worry about dirt. That's enough out of you, came a shout from the kitchen. Putting stuff in the food is very serious, said Frank. We'd better take him to Mr. Warden. Marvelous, said Rudy evenly. I haven't heard about old Elias for a whole day. Frank and Chip looked at each other and grinned, but their amusement died as abruptly as it had been born. Never mind, Mr. Warden, said Chip. I can handle this. Miller, you're confined to the cabin for the rest of the day, except for kitchen duty at supper and work detail. You too, Webster. You were in on this. Rudy shook his head sadly, and all because I wanted to improve the taste of the soup. You shut up, came another voice from the kitchen. And, said Chip, that'll be another 2 days' work detail for each of you. And, and he should have to wash my sock, put in Harold Green savagely. I don't do laundry, said Rudy. So, said Chip, sitting down wearily at the councilors' meeting that evening. They spent all day in the cabin, which is all they want to do anyway. That kid Miller, said Frank, shaking his head, just can't figure him out. Well, I know one thing, said Chip with conviction. We can't let him out of our sight. 3 times they were caught trying to run away today. 3 times! And I'm sure he hasn't given up yet. One of us has to be with him at all times. And Webster is just as bad when he's with Miller, which is all the time. Hey, suggested Ralph. Why don't we separate them? That's a great idea, said Frank. Without Miller, Webster won't be any trouble at all. Without Miller, said Chip dreamily. What a beautiful thought. But it can't be done. Miller and Webster like each other, and nobody else in camp can stand either one of them. Besides, nodded Frank in reluctant agreement, they may not like it here, but it's still our job to see that they hate it the least. The meeting was interrupted by the stormy entrance of the chief cook. All right, he demanded. Which one of you is the keeper of that guy Miller? I am, admitted Chip sadly. A piece of paper was thrust under his nose. Chip began to read. We, the undersigned, refuse to work in the Algonquin kitchen if Miller is going to be there. It's been signed by every member of the kitchen staff, pointed out the cook. Chip sighed. What exactly has he done? He puts down the food all the time. Come off it, scoffed Frank. You guys have worked in a camp long enough to have learned to ignore wisecracks about the food. I understand, put in Chip. When it's Miller, it's different. He's so good at it. I better take him and Webster off kitchen duty before we have a revolution. Oh, we don't mind Webster, said the cook. Mind you, he laughs at old Miller's jokes. Better take them both off. We'd sure appreciate it. That's okay, said Chip. The only problem is that I've run out of ways to punish them. Anybody got any ideas? How about putting them on work detail, suggested Jack Tyler. I've lost count of their work details, admitted Chip. For all I know, they're on until Christmas. He rested his chin on his palm. Anyway, we've got to keep an eye on Miller. They said they're going to arts and crafts tomorrow, right after breakfast. I'll see that they get there. Then it's up to you, Pierre. What? Asked Pierre. What have I done to deserve that? Just watch them, said Chip. You're in charge of them until lunch. The beaver was satisfied. The humans had been quiet today, and he had been able to accomplish a great deal of work on the dam. It was really taking shape now. He hoped he would have many more productive days like this one.